Back in the early 80s, when British haulage yards were still filled with ERFs, Fodens, and the odd Volvo F12, something quietly rolled in from Germany that would change the game completely, even if nobody realized it at the time. The Mercedes-Benz 1633 didn't show up with fireworks or glossy brochures. It just turned up, got the job done, and did it well. But underneath that square-faced cab was a sleeping giant, a truck that would shape the future of European long-haul trucking without ever asking for the spotlight. You've got to understand, the 1633 came from a different world. In Britain, we were still riding high on the nostalgia of grit-built trucks. We liked things heavy, rugged, mechanical. But Mercedes, they were thinking 10 steps ahead. They weren't just building lorries, they were engineering solutions. And when the 1633 arrived, it brought along something that would become legendary. The OM422 V8 diesel engine, a real workhorse. Not just powerful, but smooth. Not just reliable, but clever. It made noise when you wanted it to and settled into a low hum when you didn't. For a driver pulling a fridge trailer up the M6 or crossing into France for a double drop, it was like swapping a pair of old boots for something with real grip and balance. The cab was no palace, but it was a noticeable shift. Gone were the Spartan interiors of British Motors. In came a more refined, thought-out space. A proper bunk, decent heating, better visibility. It felt like the blokes in Stuttgart had actually listened to drivers instead of just ticking boxes. And that's what made the 1633 stand out. It didn't just perform, it understood the job. But let's talk about what really made it special, the balance of power and grace. That V8 was good for about 330 horsepower, which doesn't sound wild today. But back then it was impressive, especially when delivered in such a smooth, torque-rich curve. It wasn't about racing up hills, it was about pulling through them. Even with a full load, it didn't feel like it was straining, it just kept going. Mile after mile, you could sit at cruising speed for hours and not feel battered by the end of it. That was new, that was rare. And the thing is, hauliers started to take notice, especially the ones who dealt in international work. Suddenly, the 1633 was being spec'd for continental jobs, the kind of routes where reliability mattered more than anything else. Breakdown in Bolton and you're a phone call away from help. Breakdown in Belgium with a load of perishables, that's a different story. And this Merc? It didn't break down, not often anyway. That reputation started to grow, quietly, steadily, but with weight. Of course, it didn't win everyone over. Some old-school British drivers looked at the Mercedes badge and rolled their eyes. Too soft, they'd say. Give me a proper motor, something you can fix with a hammer. And that was fair enough, but the lads who actually drove the 1633 day in, day out, they got it. They felt the difference, and they knew this truck was pointing towards the future, whether the industry was ready or not. There's also something to be said about its gearbox. The 1633 came with a 16-speed box, not for show, but for finesse. You could pick your revs like a conductor guiding an orchestra. It wasn't just about dumping torque into the wheels and hoping for the best. It was about managing the power. On hills, in rain, through tight turns in narrow villages. You had options, and when you got used to it, the truck almost became an extension of yourself. Over time, fleets started swapping in Mercs where old motors used to be. Not en masse, not with banners and champagne, just slowly, quietly. The 1633 was never flashy, and it didn't need to be, because while everyone else was shouting, it was just working, delivering, proving itself. And that's the mark of a true haulier's truck, one that earns respect, not demands it. Now, some call it a transitional truck, a stepping stone to what Mercedes would later become in the heavy-duty game. And maybe they're right, but calling it just a step sells it short. This was the truck that introduced a generation of British and European drivers to a different kind of lorry, one that didn't need brute force to prove a point, one that didn't shout but whispered and still got the job done. And even now, decades later, when you see one parked up at a show or tucked away in a barn, there's a kind of quiet awe, not because it was the biggest or the fastest, but because it changed the game without anyone noticing until it was too late to look back. The years rolled on, and just like that, the Mercedes 1633 faded into the backdrop, replaced by shinier, sleeker models. The Actros took over the stage with its modern looks and flashy tech. The old square cab Mercs were quietly shuffled into smaller fleets, sold off to owner drivers, or sent south across borders where tough trucks were still needed, no matter how many miles they had on the clock. But what never left, not really, was the legacy the 1633 carved out mile by mile. It had proven something that stuck with the industry, that comfort and capability could coexist. that you didn't have to beat a driver half to death just to get a load up to Aberdeen or across to Antwerp. And that good engineering wasn't always loud or showy. Sometimes it was silent, precise, and built to outlast the job itself. Ask any veteran who ran one in the 80s or early 90s, and they'll tell you it didn't feel like a truck from that era. It felt ahead of it. Some of these motors went 500,000 miles or more before even thinking of a rebuild. That OM422 V8, if you treated it right, would just keep going. A bit of injector cleaner here, oil changes bang on schedule, and that lump would start every winter with a shake and a cough, ready for another shift. Even now, some of those engines are still running in yard tractors or mounted into agricultural conversions, proof that they weren't built for a season, but for a lifetime. And then there was the reputation Mercedes had earned because of the 1633. It didn't just sell trucks, it sold trust. It opened the door for fleet managers to take Mercedes seriously when the bigger orders came through. You could suddenly make a case for buying German, even on a British budget. The drivers backed it. The mechanics appreciated the simplicity and access. And by the time the successors rolled in, Merc already had one foot in the future. But here's the thing. The 1633 was never meant to be a flagship. It was a transition truck, a bridge between old-school mechanical brute force and the electronically managed beasts of today. It didn't come with digital dashboards or predictive cruise control. It didn't park itself or log your hours automatically. What it did do was offer you a dependable cab, a brilliant drivetrain, and enough comfort to make a night away from home feel slightly less miserable. And for that, it earned respect, quiet respect. The sort that doesn't fill magazines or social feeds, but lives on in the backs of haulage depots and the memories of the blokes who actually drove them. Because let's be honest, a driver remembers. You remember the trucks that rattled your fillings loose. You remember the ones that left you broken down outside Hull in the pouring rain. But most of all, you remember the ones that got you home, with your load intact and your back still in one piece. And the 1633, that was one of those trucks. Now, a few are still out there. You'll spot one, maybe once in a blue moon, at a vintage rally, paint faded, decals half peeled, but still standing proud. Or you'll see one listed on some obscure classified site, low loader use only, still pulling its weight after all these years. And when you do, there's a kind of reverence in the comments, blokes sharing their memories. I had one in 88, pulled like a train. Best motor I ever owned. You don't get that with every truck. But the 1633 earned it. Its story, like most good ones, is bittersweet. Because for all it achieved, it never got the crown. It never became the poster truck. It simply laid the foundation. And the truth is, without it, the modern Mercedes haulage lineup wouldn't be what it is. The Actros, the Axle, even the latest electric platforms, all of them owe something to that quiet revolution that began with a square cab and a V8 that wouldn't quit. So when we talk about forgotten heroes, let's not forget what that really means. It's not about being ignored, it's about being essential, but humble. It's about doing the hard miles, not for the glory, but because someone had to. And in that sense, the Mercedes 1633 was more than just a truck. It was a reminder that real legends don't need flashing lights or dramatic exits. They just need the open road and enough diesel to get to the next stop.